temos a honra de receber um dos principais nomes internacionais da interseção entre arquitetura e neurociência, Ty Farrow. Arquiteto canadense, Ty é pioneiro no estudo de como os ambientes construídos podem promover ou prejudicar a saúde humana. Foi o primeiro arquiteto do seu país a obter um mestrado em neurociência aplicada à arquitetura e tem se apresentado em mais de 55 cidades nos 6 continentes. Autor do livro best-seller Constructing Health: How to Build Environment Enhances Your Mind's Health, publicado pela University of Toronto Press, explora a relação entre espaços, saúde mental e desempenho humano. Com vocês, Ty Farrow.
Fantastic. Thank you. How are you this afternoon? Have you been enjoying the conference? Looking forward to spending a little time with you. What I would like to do is talk to you about the ability of architecture to actively cause health. That the things that we decide to do around design have the ability to change our physiology and biology as a result of the design choices we make. And I'd like to speak about it specifically in the context around health and defining health, but more so around the idea specifically of mind health. We don't often think really about how our surroundings affect us. We often think that we're separated and distinct. And I think that came out of the French philosopher, 17th century philosopher, René Descartes, who said, you know, the mind and the body were totally separate. And we know indeed that is not the case. We know that, in fact, our environments change our physiology, our biology. They influence the way we think, our memories and emotions, simply with the environments we're immersed in. And emerging research actually is showing and challenging the assumptions, the past assumptions of where the body stopped and, in fact, where the environment began beyond that. And, in fact, the research is showing that, in fact, both of those, the body and the environment, are one. So part of it comes from this idea that our bodies are like a massive radar dish. And that radar dish is collecting 11 million bits of information, sensory information, that's coming into you every second now. But only about 50 bits of that information you perceive, meaning that it's conscious. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the information isn't being picked up by your body. It is being picked up your body consciously, pre-consciously, subconsciously, by all of your senses, your sight, sound, touch, hearing. And this idea that there's this bidirectional relationship between the information that comes in. If I come to you and I poke you with a pin, your body is going to tell your mind that you better move very quickly. But you know, when you listen to some great music, you go to a concert, you hear something fantastic, and that sore arm that you had begins to wash away. That is because your mind, because of the immersive nature of the environments that we're in, are telling your body that everything is all right. So that bidirectional flow of information that the environment is feeding us is very, very important. So what I'd like to do with you is explore this idea: can we actively construct health? Can the choices that you decide in your design decisions in fact actively cause health? But if we get into that discussion, what we need to do is define what health is. Is health and healthcare the same thing? Or are they fundamentally different? And if we get into that, then what we need to do is begin to understand what causes health. And I don't mean stopping bad things from happening. What I mean is actively using the environment as an accelerant for our health and well-being. So I fundamentally believe we need to find a new path forward. We need to find a new path forward, fundamentally, whereby we see the environments we create as health-generating systems. The environments that we create that are active accelerants for our physiological, our psychological, and our biological health. This idea that we should start viewing placemaking fundamentally not by what it is, but actively what it does and its ability to cause health. What if health was the basis for judging every public space and every building we create? What happens if we no longer tolerate environments like this that cause dis-ease, and I'm using that word very specifically, boredom and depression? How do environments make us feel? But more importantly, how do they make us feel better? This idea, if there's only one thing you remember from this talk, if there's only one thing you take away, it is that there is no such thing as neutral space. There is no space that sits in the middle that doesn't change our physiology and our biology from either a positive or a negative standpoint. The problem is that most of the environments we know are on the negative side of the equation. And this idea that the spaces either undermine our health or, in fact, are accelerants. But lately, we live very much in a pathogenic view of the world around us. We all know the word pathogenics, coming out of the Latin and the Greek words of patho and genesis, meaning disease and the origins of disease. Yet historically, for 2,000 years of human history, we had a salutogenic view of the world. How many people know of the concept of salutogenesis? It's a concept that was developed in the 1970s by a guy called Antonovsky. It comes out of the Latin and the Greek roots of the word for solace, tying to the goddess of health and well-being, Solace, and also this idea of Genesis, this tying together the words of health and something that is a generator actively for health. But the question is, why are we living in a pathogenic view of the world? Why don't we have a salutogenic view? Well, part of the reason is that medical scientists and medical researchers have identified 8,000 known causes or symptoms of disease. But they've only identified 80 known causes or symptoms of health. Why is that? Why is it that we're in that sort of a mindset? Well, the one stat for me in researching my book that I found extraordinary is we spend more time indoors than most whales spend underwater. Isn't that remarkable? And we're worried about the microplastics and the chemicals that we're flooding our oceans with because we understand the impact of the microplastics on the health and well-being of all of the marine life. But do we view the same way? Do we view our habitats as things that can either be problematic and pollute our health, or in fact, like the whale, that in all of the nutrients the whale and the marine life needs is in the environment that's surrounding it? Do we view our own environments in the same active view? We talk a lot about high-performance buildings. Buildings that, from an ecological and a sustainable standpoint, are very, very important. The mechanical systems, the electrical, and the envelopes. But do we view them the same way around human performance? The human performance as a result of the design choices we decide to make. Environments that have the ability to stimulate memory, creativity, empathy, social interaction, simply as a result of the design choices you make. Connecting the dots fundamentally between placemaking, mind health, and human performance. Who is this fine-looking gentleman? Anybody know? Any guesses? Shall I give you a hint? He was responsible for designing this. American landscape architect who designed Central Park in the middle of New York. Frederick Law Olmsted is known as, in fact, one of the fathers of modern landscape architecture, along certainly a little earlier than some of the great ones in this city. But he was known as the founder of landscape architecture. But in fact, Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park and all of the immersive parks, he wasn't a landscape architect. Olmsted was not a landscape architect. His two sons were. They started the program at Harvard. Frederick Law Olmsted was the founder of the United States Sanitary Commission, which was a forerunner for the Red Cross. He, in fact, was an early public health pioneer. He used design as an active ingredient. You know what he also described Central Park as? Think of this. Think of doing a design and going to pitch it to your client and walking into your client and showing something as beautiful as Central Park and describing it as a sanitary institution. Do you think it would get it over the line with your client? But in fact, that's the way that he talked about design. He talked about its ability, in fact, to do a variety of things. The ability of design to enhance and cause ecological, physical, societal, and mind health as a result of the design decisions we actively choose to make. This idea of design as actively being health-giving as a result of the choices we make. So clearly we know that the design decisions we make can have significant positive or negative impacts on clearly our ecological health and the decisions such as this that we make. Clearly we know that design has the ability to have significant impact on societal health as a result of the choices we make, either positive or negative. And clearly we know that design has the ability to have significant impact on our physical health as a result of communities such as this, design decisions that we make. And in fact, clearly we know, because of environments like this that are often called food deserts, but in fact they're food swamps because they're packed with ultra-processed food that does significant damage to our bodies, similar to the environments that we sometimes create. And this emerging area of mind health and the intersection of neuroscience and architecture, certainly Laurie Cruz, I'm thankful to be here, a great Brazilian neuroarchitect, very much that I admire his work and in fact is a pioneer in this area. But this idea of looking at the connection of our mind and perception and its relationship back to the idea of placemaking, mind health, and human performance. What I'd like to do now is walk a little deeper, deepen our knowledge a little further into this idea of environmental enrichment. So environmental enrichment, the concept was developed, in fact, by a Canadian in the 1940s, Donald Hebe, who was a scientist, and he had a lab with lab mice that were in shiny metal cages with the light on 24 hours a day. And what he did is he took some of the mice out of his lab and he brought it home and he put the mice in an environment like this. And in a very short period, what did he discover? He discovered that the mice had less social problems. They were quicker at learning and solving problems and tests. And in fact, they lived longer. These mice as a result of the change of the environment. This research goes on further to a lady that I really admire at the University of California, Berkeley. Diamond is her name. In the 1960s, she takes the environmental enrichment research and takes it a step further. What does she do? She takes some mice and she leaves them in the shiny lab cages with the lights on 24 hours a day. She then takes another group of mice and she puts them in a regular cage for mice that has a running wheel, in the water and the rest. And she takes another set of mice and she puts them in an enriched environment like this, that they could run around and play and do a variety of things. And then after 30 days, just 30 days, she dissects the brains of the mice. This is only after 30 days. And what does she discover? The mice that are in the enriched environments, this is only after 30 days, the synapses, which are very important connections between the neurons in your mind, they grow at rates of somewhere between 20, 25 to 30%. The neurons in the brain are growing at a significant rate after 30 days. And also the cortex, which is on the top of the brain, it begins to thicken also in a very short period. What happens to the mice that are in the regular cage with the running wheel? Nothing happens, their brain doesn't change. What happens to the mice in the impoverished environment? This is only after 30 days. The synapses, which are the important connections with the neurons, they begin to fade and wither away the same way that a plant does without sunlight or water after a very short period of time. So we know these environments that we inhabit, which are known as impoverished environments, in fact, they speed up aging, dementia, and a variety of other things simply as a result of the environment. The question is this exactly the same with humans, or is it just with our little furry friends, the mice? A very famous case, which is called the Angola 3. It's about 3 people that are put in solitary confinement without a window from anywhere from 10 to 15, and Robert King is in solitary confinement for 29 years, all except for 1 hour a day. This case gets taken to the Supreme Court in the United States, and what they're trying to prove, surprisingly, is that this is cruel and unusual punishment. And the only way they can prove it is that if it changes the structure of the body, the brain, and the physiology. And in fact, what they discover is that this damages the hippocampus, which is a very important part under your brain for a number of things, including spatial orientation. They proved it, and in fact, the case won. But this same type of thing is happening today. There's an idea called white room torture. What is white room torture? Picture this evening after the conference. You listen to some talks, maybe have a drink, and you walk out to your car. You walk up to your car and a van pulls up. 3 people jump out of that van, they grab you, they handcuff you, they hood you, and they throw you in the back of the van. They drive you to a location, they throw you into rooms such as this, white walls, white floors, white ceiling, light is continuous, and the furniture is white. And just to ensure that you're broken, they feed you white rice on white plates. They don't touch you. They don't touch you. The environment does all of the work. After about 6 weeks, they take you, they throw you in the van, they bring you back, and they drop you at the curb beside your car, and you're broken. They're doing this to dissidents actively, and it takes years and years and years for them to come back. Should we shift back to the more positive side of environmental enrichment? What do you think? Do you think we should sort of move into something that's a little more uplifting than the white room torture? Let's dig a little deeper into it. So as we've talked about, whatever environment we walk into, we have cognitive and precognitive reactions, and those have physiological and psychological reactions. And as a result of those reactions, they can change your cortisol levels, which is the stress side, lower your blood pressure, increase your serotonin levels, which are a very important regenerative neurotransmitter. It can enhance your immunity, your wellness, memory, learning, as we've heard. And this stuff isn't new. This is stuff that is being studied for somewhere around 50 years. And one of the areas that I'd like to touch on that really interests me, and the rest of the stuff is covered in the book, is this idea of place attachment theory. What is place attachment theory? What it says is that we form emotional relationships with our surroundings. We form very strong relationships with the environments that we inhabit. And we form those person-to-place relationships. Our mind forms those person-to-place relationships in the same way, or in a very similar way, that we form meaningful person-to-person relationships. And those relationships, the way they're formed, are tied back to this idea of a sense of coherence. And a sense of coherence is buttressed by this idea of comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness. And those, which we'll touch on in a minute, come out of that root, that idea that we were talking about around that idea of salutogenesis. So what I fundamentally believe is we need to start thinking of our environments as non-invasive therapeutic treatments. We need to think of our environments as things that, in fact, actually feed us. And as a result of these non-invasive therapeutic treatments, again, the environment has the ability to stimulate memory, learning, creativity, empathy, and social interaction as a result of the places we create. Thinking of the environments that we create, in fact, that are things that are actively feeding us. So this idea of architecture as food, thinking about the spaces that are actual nutrients that begin to feed us, that have the ability, as we've heard, to enrich our mind, our bodies, and in fact our spirit as a result of the choices we make, or indeed to do the exact opposite, to starve us. These environments that effectively are what can be termed as empty calories that cause, again, that word and the emphasis on it, on disease, dis-ease, boredom, as a result of the choices we make. What is this? Somebody's lunch? A hamburger? Oops. So for me, what the hamburger represents is effectively a metaphor for a lot of the environments we create. This idea that it's simply transactional, but it's functional. Aren't we asked to create buildings that are functional as a main driver? They've got to be functional, effective. This is functional, isn't it? You don't need a plate and a knife. You can pick it up in your hands and consume it. It does exactly what it's asked to do. It gives you some calories, gives you a little protein, but you know after you consume it an hour later, you're feeling empty. It leaves you feeling empty. And in fact, what this does is it damages your body because of the ultra-processed nature of the things that are in it, including the sodium and other additives. But isn't that very similar to the environments that we create? They do exactly what they're asked, but they don't do anything else. They don't nurture and feed us. This idea of why aren't our environments similar to this? These superfoods that are packed full of minerals and vitamins, those pomegranates, other things that do extraordinary things to all aspects of our bodies, our physiology and our biology. They nourish all aspects of our systems. The question is, why is this relevant to the way we decide to design the cities, the way we design learning environments like this that are supposed to activate and enhance creativity and learning? What about the places we go to heal that are supposed to help us on our journey? Or specifically environments like this, the cubicles. How many people have worked in environments such as this? Hands up. So you may not have realized, but at the end of the session, you have to come to the front of the room, and we have to open up your tops to see how many synapses have grown. And the rest of you that are feeling very smug because you work in extraordinary environments, you need to do the same thing, because we have to see if you're the smarter ones out of all of us because of the environments also. But this idea of environments, and I want to step this a little further and deepen our knowledge into this idea of the multi-sensorial aspects of our environments. And they have a relationship to our interoceptive systems, our proprioceptive systems, and our exteroceptive systems. What does that mean? Interoceptive, you know when you have that feeling of butterflies in your stomach and something's not right? That's the inside of your body telling you to do something. The proprioceptive is our perception and our movement in space. It has a relationship to how our body and our skin feels and interacts. And the exteroceptive, you know how you can feel what's behind you and around you? That is your body as a massive radar dish that is collecting information to tell you what you should be doing. So let's deepen this a little further. There's a lady who's very influential in our work and thinking, Barrett, and she's developed this thing called the constructive theory of emotion. You should look up some of her work if you have further interest. What does she say? She says that there's the external world all around us, and there's the internal world that's up within in our mind. And what she says is that there's inputs that come in, again, multisensorial through all of our senses. And they come through smell, taste, touch, kinesthetics, really that idea of our body's movement within space. We're designed to move. And our vestibular system, meaning that our perception being at the ground floor or our perception up on a balcony looking down is very different because of these sensory systems. And what she says is that and these things are coming in through a variety of our systems. And so when they're coming in through our senses, and then they're going out as a prediction. And so the prediction, the outputs, is as a result of all of our nervous systems. So our sympathetic, parasympathetic, automatic, and the somatic and the voluntary. And so these, because of the inputs, everything we hear, it tells us what we should do, what our reaction should be. But the most important part about it is that your reaction and my reaction to those inputs are going to be different. And they're going to be different because of things we've experienced and, in fact, things we've learned, which can be cultural. And they can color and make those reactions very, very different. What's an example of that? What do we see here? Classical building? Probably looks like maybe a courthouse, a parliament building. Maybe represents order, good government, and civility. But that might be as a result of where we are. But in fact, if this is the parliament building, in South Africa, where the apartheid laws were enacted, if I'm a young black man or woman, this thing doesn't represent order and good government. In fact, it represents to me oppression. But it's the same architecture, it's the same columns, but it's communicating different things because of our experiences and what we've learned. And so coming back to this idea, is on the predictions and the outputs as a result of the environmental factors, Back to the idea of place attachment theory and how we form relationships. So this idea, remember, we form relationships, person to place, in the same way in our mind's eye as we form meaningful person-to-person relationships. And what they're tied to, this is, it's called the circumplex model. And it was developed to show, in fact, all of the emotions that we have. And clearly we know that there's thousands of emotions, so this is simplifications. But our emotions are known by this word of affect. And what this diagram has is two axes. It's got a vertical axis and it's got a horizontal axis. And so the horizontal one, from the far side to this side, shows your emotions going from miserable, moving to this side, being happy and delighted. And the vertical axis is the intensity, which is known as arousal. So at the bottom, it's being very, very sleepy and tired, and moving up to the top, it's being really hyper and active. What I want to do is focus on the positive side of the emotional spectrum as it relates to the design decisions that we make. It's not that the other side isn't important, but the problem is often the environments that we create stimulate the emotions on the negative side as opposed to the positive side. I'm just going to give you one example, which is in fact, I think, a very positive one. Has anybody been to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin by Libeskind? So it is an extraordinary building. When you go in, you feel awful. You feel totally thrown on your back foot because of the movement, the air, the bent walls, the distorted floors. And so it is stimulating those negative reactions to do something very important, to communicate the unsettlement and the horror of the Holocaust. The only problem, which is a larger debate, that Libeskind does the same thing when you go to a museum to look at crystals or dinosaur bones. All I want to do is focus on the positive side of the emotional side. And so this idea of these emotions, remember place attachment theory, are tied back to this idea of a sense of coherence, comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness. And tied back to the idea of salutogenesis. And so what I'd like to do is walk through these qualities that we've studied of the positive qualities of environmental enrichment. And what I'd like to say is these qualities, you can think of them more as ingredients you put into food. They're not prescriptive. They're like ingredients. What do I mean by that? Take cinnamon, for example. For me, with cinnamon, I think of Christmas time, maybe a spiced wine, maybe some cinnamon in a roast goose. But if I take that same flavor and I move it into India and put it in an Indian biryani, the cultural and the memory and the overlays are very, very different. But the taste of cinnamon, that sort of woody or semi-sweet flavor, is in fact the same in both examples. So this idea that they're ingredients that you mix in the meals, like a recipe of a food, that have different outcomes, but in fact that same flavor remains. What does that mean, and what are the examples of it? So the qualities, the first is this idea of generosity. Generosity, environments that give more than they're asked for. What's an example of that? Person-to-person relationship. Think of a mentor that helped you out in your career without asking. They helped you along in what you were doing without asking anything. And how does that relate to an environment? Think of an environment that you walk out and it's sunny and hot and there's just a canopy to create a little shade or to keep the rain out. That's an act of generosity as a result of the design decisions we make. Authenticity, we know people that aren't authentic And in fact, we know a lot of architecture that's very similar. So this idea of an architecture that's real and rooted and tied to its place. This idea of variety and vitality, environments that lead you along, create that sense of occurrence, and this concept tied to seeking curiosity and positive ambiguity. This idea of architecture and people that communicate hope and hopefulness. Hope is very different than optimism. Optimism, I could imagine as a Canadian that I'm going to play in the National Hockey League, but in fact, that might just be delusional as opposed to optimistic. Hope is very different. Hope is something that helps you find a path forward, imagining a path forward, to be able to see the barriers in front of you, and in fact, to be able to understand how to move through them. This idea of spaces, back to Slutogenesis, that communicate a way forward, a meaningful, and give you agency. The last one is tied to this idea of natural. We know a lot of people that are very natural and easy to be with. And certainly in architecture, we know and we hear a lot about the concepts of biophilia, but it's really tied to environments that have natural light, natural material, natural shapes and forms. It could be natural plants, but also all of those things being multi-dimensional, not just visual, but sound. Think of birds chirping, for example, and also this mid-range complex fractal patterns. I don't know if people have heard a lot about mid-range fractal patterns. There's fractal patterns that are in the middle that aren't too complex. Think of a thicket in a forest, which are very hard to understand. If they're very simple and boring, if they're very simple, then we get bored. If they're in the middle, then that's a sweet spot that we're really engaged with. This last one is very important for me. I think we learned a little bit about it going through COVID. This idea of silence and stillness and intimacy and solidness. We know a lot of our relationships that are like that are very solid and intimate. And in fact, we begin to know some of the architecture that's like that. In fact, I was in the reception of the Foreign Ministry just down the road yesterday, and interestingly, in the main reception areas, extraordinary, that sort of silence and stillness. So what I want to do is walk through some examples of this very, very quickly. So I'm just going to walk through examples of it in our own work, and you'll see I'm highlighting individual features, but as you can imagine, they're like ingredients of a menu where we mix a bunch of them. Let's start with this idea around generosity. So remember this idea of surroundings that give more than they ask for, and they communicate a higher purpose. This is just a little school, so I'm going to look at buildings at all scales, from very small to very big. Does this look like a school that anybody went to, that you walk up to it and it's surrounded by a parking lot and asphalt? Remember we were talking about that idea of a sense of coherence, comprehensibility? Can anybody tell where the front door is? How do you get into this building? Does it communicate that to us? So what we did is, you can see the building at the top, we added this curved building, this new programmatic element. But you'll see from the parking lot, you then move into a garden. The garden is wrapped by a building as if it has its arms stretched out. There's a canopy that covers you and protects you. You move into the building. From the building, you then look into a courtyard, a new courtyard, and then from that courtyard, you move back into the building itself. You can see going from the parking, the garden, so a gathering spot for parents and kids before and after school. You then come to a spot where there's a canopy that you're protected from the elements. You move into the building. You can see that the building, the roof's asymmetrical, lower as you come in, then opens up towards the garden beyond it. That's how it was. This is the new area. But you'll notice that the path isn't straight. The path changes. Why is it? Because as you move through, your vision changes as you move down the path. The plants have been chosen very, very specifically because of their scent and their color that's changing. So that every day and season, depending on the weather, the sensory event is very different. You can see moving into the canopy. From the canopy, you then move inside. The entrance is at the far corner. You can see it lower on the one side, higher at the middle. The plan, as you saw, is semicircular in its arrangement, meaning that the arches, perceptually, they appear to be a half circle, and then they appear to be an ellipse. You can begin to see some of those fractal patterns that I was talking about, the mix between the curves, which our eye likes to follow, and the triangles that are like sparks and our eye stops. Why is the arch? Is this just some architectural folly? In fact, the arch was also added because it reduces the span of the beam up above by half, and in fact reduce the cost of the building, as well as helping on this sensory idea. But this building that just has the ability to capture the light, the changing light, so that you know that you're alive. This idea of environments that offer variety and vitality, this range of sensory experiences, discovery and enhancing curiosity, and this idea of positive ambiguity. This again is just a very little school. And the outside of the building has this extraskeletal structure. Think of a lobster or a shrimp where the structure is put on the outside. The same thing has happened here. The structure has been designed with this constants and distance, this motion that you know in music, you know, those regular rhythms that happen, and then those sparks of music that dance along the way. But the question is, why is this done? Is it just simply an architectural folly on the outside of the building? Well, in fact, it's not about what it does on the outside of the building. It is what it does on the inside of the building. Because when you're inside the building as a young student, there's a feeling that you're living in a treehouse. But more importantly, as the light changes from the early morning to the end of the day, from the spring, the summer, the winter, then in fact the shadows begin to move and trace themselves across the walls of the building. This idea of using space as a non-invasive therapeutic treatment that can help enhance creativity, social interaction as a result of the design choices we decide to make. At a very large scale, this seeking and curiosity, variety and vitality, a hospital, brand new hospital we did that's about 100,000 square meters. The main public area is curved and it's designed to capture and follow the sun as it moves throughout the day. You can see that you can't see the end of the corridor. Your mind uses 30% of the energy of all organs of the body. When it sees a straight corridor, it sums it up very quickly. When you see the curve, as you know, you want to know what's around the corner, and it begins to lead you further down the path. You can see the staircase also, it's not straight run, because as you move up it, your view changes, looking at different things, meaning that it's massaging your mind. This idea of hope that we talked about, areas that communicate a way forward, meaningfulness that we talked about, and a sense of growth. This is a cancer center that we just opened in the ancient city of Jerusalem. You know, a lot of hospitals that are boxes and they look like their chest is being pushed further forward. This intentionally, the front facade curves in. The sides that they're calling wings, they're now calling it a butterfly. They're asymmetrical. There's this timber brise-soleil that wraps the outside of the buildings. It stretches out to create these plazas, these little cafes that when you're going for cancer treatment, you, your family, or otherwise, can just sit quietly and have a little cup of tea or coffee or a drink. These areas that are just up on the edge, that are smaller, they're for staff and families that are going through it so that they can simply sit and catch their breath in the intensity of the medical treatment. And the architecture, we talked about natural or like biophilia, that the architecture is trying to communicate growth and upwards life. The brise soleil that wraps it, the inside of the building, is bathed in daylight in all area. There are these terraces that cascade down through the middle. These are not waiting areas. They're not reception areas. They're just places to come and sit quietly under the light, to catch your breath and bring yourself together. These quiet, still areas. And at the very bottom, this is when you walk out of radiation treatment, which is usually some of the worst time that you're going through in your life. When you walk out of the radiation treatment bunker, what do you see? You see a garden. The soil has been chosen very specifically because it has the scent of a forest. We know that the scent of smell, its cortex, and the visual memory cortex are very close together. You know when you're walking down the road and say you smell perfume and it reminds you of somebody specifically? It's the same thing with the scent of the forest, is it takes you away from the medical treatment to your memories of being in a forest and hiking. You can see that the architecture appears to grow and bend up the walls to the ceiling, again communicating life at a point where you're in very rough stage. These quiet little areas just to come and sit in the sunshine by the plants to get a breath of air. The wood has been chosen very specifically because it has a scent. You know when you go into a sauna and there's the smell of cedar or eucalyptus? The architecture is communicating those messages to you of health and well-being as a result of the choices. Natural environments, we talked about that, places inspired by nature, natural materials, natural light, natural plants, and these mid-range complex patterns. I'm going to show you two projects that are at very, very different scale. One a resort, just little tree houses, and the other a major cancer institution. This idea of the resort that is inspired by this little seed pod, this little maple seed pod. And so the tree houses, they're hung from the trees by wires. Usually, you know, we nail the nails in to support a platform. This has a collar with wires that come down and they support your own little residence. There's a ladder that goes down so you can pull up the drawbridge if you don't want anybody to come in. The public areas are out, the living rooms out on the front, and further back in is the bedroom, like where the seed pod is, and the bathroom in behind. Think of a boat and the same technology. The inside of it, sitting at the bed and looking forward to the public area, it's wrapped by a screen. Moving on to something at a different scale. Again, this is another hospital, a cancer center. When you walk in, this idea that it looks like you're walking into a tree-lined garden. You can see natural plants, natural light, natural material, and natural forms, all chosen very specifically to communicate a message that you're in good hands and there's life and growth as a result of it. Down to the benches, the paving patterns that are within the floor and the overall arrangement of the spaces themselves. Let's move into that last element, which is this idea of silence and solidness, stillness, and intimacy. This idea of an unplugged architecture which allows you to listen to yourself, listen to your own breathing, your own heart rate. So I'm going to show you two things. One is a very, very big campus, and one that's a building that's less than 100 square meters. So the first project is this, we've just been awarded this campus. It's large, one of the largest new medical campuses, research campus in the world. It's somewhere around 300,000 square meters. So a very, very, very big hospital. This is a picture of the hospital. Can you see the hospital? What do you see? A park? That's the hospital. Hospitals are the largest consumers of water by double of any building type. And so what we decided to do was to harvest a portion of the wastewater and use it to feed, this is in a semi-arid area, use the wastewater to create one of the largest new gardens in fact, the entire country. So this is what we were given. The site is beside a new park. This is the main building, which is sort of ambulatory care and outpatient services, where all the main receptions for the building. And so what we decided to do was take the building and just slope it, push one side down to the district park and pull the other side up. And then by doing that, allow the park to be pulled up over the top of the building. Then use the wastewater to create this new garden for the country. So you can see that the building's pushed down. It slopes up to the top, and under that is a restaurant. It's a canopy to create a little bit of shade. You can see all of the light wells. So light is very, very important. It's a nutrients for us. So every portion of the hospital is very, very close to daylight. And the last one is this little temple we're working on, very, very small. The inspiration of it is a nest, a bird's nest. And so this idea of creating this temple, which is in a very dense forest, to create something that is in the forest, but also of the forest. And so this is the outside of the building itself. The printing of it is an aggregate stone material, 3D printed on the outside. The inside is all timber. And the sense is that it begins to tie and mesh into the forest, and it changes in the same way that the forest begins to change through the various seasons with the leaves that are popping up, or in fact through into winter. When you move into the inside of the building is clad with very small pieces of wood, and everybody from the congregation can donate a piece of wood from all over Canada. Some will be hardwood, some will be softwood, some will be dark wood, some will be very, very light in color. But using the architecture simply to change and be moody because of the changing seasons and light and atmospheric conditions that happen in the forest throughout the changing portions and times of the day. If there is one thing you remember from this lecture, if there is only one thing you remember, I hope it is that there is no such thing as neutral space. There are no environments that don't change your physiology and your biology and your psychology, either positive or negative. There is nothing that sits in the middle. We, in fact, are the same as this little flower. Look at that flower stretching towards the daylight. Look at it stretching towards the light that's coming in. This idea of thinking space as something that has the ability to stimulate learning, memory, creativity, empathy, social interaction as a result of the choices we decide to make. This idea of thinking of the places we create as non-invasive therapeutic treatments, architecture that can be super vitamins that actively feed us. The same as these little blueberries in Canada that we put in our smoothies in the morning because they're packed full of minerals and vitamins that flood your body actively with nutrients. We need to find a new path forward. We need to find a new path forward, fundamentally, where we see placemaking as a health-generating system that has the ability to be an accelerant for our physiological, our psychological, and our biological health and well-being. Beginning to view architecture not by what it is, viewing architecture not by what it is, but more importantly, what it does. And what it does is has the ability to actively cause health. Why is this important? Why is this so fundamentally important in the design decisions we choose to make? Because of the design decisions we make, we have the ability to create the conditions of which we can thrive and flourish. If you have more interest in the subject area, this is the book, Constructing Health, that's come out. It's just become a global bestseller. It's laid out specifically so that the first part of it has a variety of the theories that I've talked about that are very digestible and easy to understand. The second area begins to look at how these theories can be applied. And importantly, the last part in this emerging field of study, it has a very strong glossary of terms and words. It's got 50 books to read if you want to deepen your knowledge further. The reviews globally have been strong out of the UK, Sweden, Italy, in fact, Brazil, Johns Hopkins Medical School, and AFNA. But I think you've heard enough of me. Thank you very much.